Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Veg Grower Podcast. My name's Richard and I want to encourage and inspire you to grow more of your own food. And I do this by sharing what I've been doing on my own allotment and my own garden. And this week we're starting off down on the allotment. Now, one of the first things I ever do whenever I attend my allotment is just have a bit of a walk around and just make sure that anything that needs immediate attention gets immediate attention. Now, one of the things that I've noticed today when I'm walking around is that certainly some signs that spring is just around the corner. Right at the very top, underneath my gooseberry bushes, stinging nettles are starting to show themselves. They are starting to grow. And the comfrey patch has also started to re-sprout as well. Nettles, comfrey, two things that we can use to make our own feeds and fertilizers. So we will start doing that. And this is actually very, very simple. What I do is I just pick a load of stinging nettles, pop them into a bucket with a lid on it, fill that bucket up with water and leave it to steep for a couple of weeks, and we have ourselves a lovely nettle tea. And comfrey is exactly the same. Just a couple of weeks in some water and we have ourselves a lovely comfrey tea. Now, I find nettles are best for young plants. They have a higher nitrogen level, but comfrey, that is great for flowering plants. And this is one of the things that I love having comfrey on the allotment for, because it is such a good plant for a wide range of uses. Comfrey tea, as I've just said, a fantastic plant feed that we can make ourselves. Added to that, we can also cut down that foliage, add it to our compost bins, and it's a great way of speeding up the composting process. Comfrey for me is a must, and I'm really, really pleased to start seeing it appear, and we now have to start making our own feeds for our plants. We're off to a good start already. It's really good to see. Where the nettles are, I can't say I'm happy about seeing the stinging nettles. They're underneath my gooseberry bush, and it is an area that I wanted to try and keep tidy. But nettles are also really, really good for wildlife, in particular butterflies. So there is some good things about it. It's a little bit windy today. I'm not sure if you can hear that on the microphone, but it is a little bit windy, and I'm also finding that the road alongside my allotment is now getting noisier and noisier. This is quite early on in the morning and it is already noisy. This is one of the downsides. But one of the things that is drowning out, and again you might hear this in the background, birds. The birds are tweeting, they're out and about, showing me and telling me that things are starting to improve. The weather is getting warmer, which means this allotment will soon need planting up. Other telltale signs are rhubarb is starting to sprout, so that is a good sign. We're going to start getting rhubarb in a couple of months' time, and our garlic and our overwintered onions are really starting to grow as well. Now, both of these are going to need a bit of a plant feed because they are really starting to grow quite significantly. In the week that I haven't been here, I have seen a lot of growth. So the garlic, I have a proprietary garlic fertilizer that I get from the garlic farm down on the Isle of Wight, and I just sprinkle that over the top and that works itself into the soil. And the onions, I just tend to use a bit of blood, fish and bone. I'm trying to use less and less of our plant feeds at the moment. Something that I'm really thinking about more is how it leaches into the soil, and there's so much choice of different plant feeds and fertilizers that is a bit of a difficult one to work out what to do. Obviously nettles and comfrey feeds are a natural product, so I've got no problem with using those. It's the inorganic ones that I'm a little bit worried about it leaching into the soils and washing too much into our soils. The best feed, of course, is compost, which is something we don't have enough of on this allotment, but it's something we really need to focus on a lot. And it's always been a battle, isn't it? Getting more and more compost. But yeah, we are seeing signs of life with our garlic, our onions, and things like that just sprouting in. Now, this means that luckily over the winter I have been down here quite regularly, and I've been able to get a lot of the infrastructure jobs tackled. But If everything else is growing, that means the weeds are going to start growing as well. So now we've got to start doing more weeding. This is one of those annoying jobs, but I think it's important. If we can get on top of the weeds now, it makes our life easier when they really do get into growing season. So a lot of my beds are covered over, as you know. Any beds that aren't covered over, we're going to have to spend a few minutes every single time we visit the allotment just clearing out a lot of the weeds. I think we're doing all right. I do think we are doing all right. I'm also hoping that now the weather has just started to warm up, hopefully it's going to stay. It means that we can start really getting on with this allotment, getting it planted up with food for the following year, and even things like planting in the greenhouse. Basically, spring is literally just round the corner. Our allotments are starting to come into life once again. Really good thing to see. Right, I'm going to head on home and talk to you about grow lights. In the meantime, let's find out what's been going on in the Supporters Club this week. I'm just going to interrupt this podcast quickly and just ask if you are enjoying this podcast, and please rate and review on your podcast provider. It only takes you a few seconds, but it means the world to us. It gives us some important feedback, and it also helps get the algorithms working so that we're found by more people who might be interested in growing their own food. Now, added to that, if you are also enjoying this podcast and you want to help support the work that we do and keep the wheels on this podcast running, then please consider becoming a member of our Supporters Club. Our Supporters Club is set up to give you something in return for your support, however. For just £5 a month, you get access to extra behind-the-scenes podcasts. They give you a bit of an idea what's going on here at the Veg Grower Podcast HQ. Added to that, each month that you are a member, you also receive a collection of seeds sent through your letterbox that can be sown in that very month. And with the seeds, you also get a copy of our mini newspaper, which gives you a few ideas on how to grow the seeds, as well as a few ideas of what you can also be doing throughout that month. Personally, I think for £5 it's an absolute bargain, but of course I would say that. Now, as an example of what we've been doing over this last week, we've been sowing some seeds. We've had some dill seeds that we have sown, which are always a very, very popular herb. One of my favourites and one that I thoroughly enjoy. And along with the dill, we've also had some beetroot seeds, which is another one that's one of my favourite root crops to grow, one that's well worth growing outside in our veggie pot. Now, if that is something you would be interested in signing up, and we appreciate everybody that does sign up, then please head to theveggrowerpodcast.co.uk to find out more. Right, back to the gardening. Now, I'm currently in a really good routine of where every morning I'm either sowing seeds or potting our seedlings on, putting them into bigger and bigger pots in order to get them growing well. At the moment, we've got quite a good collection of seeds: aubergines, chilies, tomatoes, all of which are still indoors. And that doesn't include our herbs and some of our cooler loving plants as well. But one of the things that I've really noticed is that some of our plants that are under grow lights are definitely growing much better than plants that aren't under grow lights. And by that I mean we've got better looking, greener foliage and better roots. Roots really being quite the important thing at this time of year, I feel anyway. Strong roots mean we get strong plants. Unfortunately, I've only got so many grow lights, and of course they cost money, but what I'm realising is that I probably could do with more grow lights. Now, a few years ago, before I got grow lights, I actually recorded a podcast in which I said I didn't feel I needed grow lights. And then I got some, and I have been blown away with the difference it has made to my seedlings. My biggest problem here is that our windows are facing east and west. We've got no south-facing windows, and that means that our windows only really get light in part of the day, be it morning or evening, depending on which side of the house they are on. Now, light does come through the rest of the day, of course, but it's much darker, and I can actually see the difference that it makes. So my bedroom window, for example, is facing west. In the morning, it's very, very dark. But come the evening, it gets lighter and lighter in there. So it does make quite a difference. It really, really does. Now the grow lights that I actually got from IKEA, and there was two types that they were selling at the time. They got these strips that are just LED strips, nice and easy, and they were originally sold with their hydroponic systems. And then I've got some standard Edison screw bulbs, some sort of standard bulbs that screw into a standard light holder. I say standard bulbs, these are grow light bulbs. They are full spectrum lights. And they are both intended actually for growing indoors. So for me, I got these because I thought they were nice and simple, and actually they have performed quite well. Unfortunately, IKEA doesn't sell them anymore, which is a little bit disappointing. But I have been looking around to see what other grow lights are on the market. My greenhouse at the moment is still pretty cold. It does face south, so it does get a bit more light in the greenhouse, but it is still pretty cold. Slowly warming up. We've got a thermometer in there that we do keep an eye on the temperature, but it is slowly warming up. And in a few weeks, I think we might be okay in the greenhouse. But for now, we just need more space. We are rapidly running out of space. Everywhere in my house, all the windowsills are full up with young plants. I've got way too many, but that's normal for us. So what I've been looking at is other areas where I can grow some plants. And by this I mean we would have to pot in grow lights. And I've identified two areas in which we could do this in. First being my loft, which is a dark area, so it definitely needs grow lights and heat up there, as well as smoke alarms. Not really practical at the moment though, maybe in the future. The other area was my garage. Now my garage is on the north end of my house, and it's not really used for storage of cars. I mean, who uses their garage for storage of cars these days? But it is an area where I have several shelvings units that we can attach grow lights and even a autopot system in order to get more space for growing plants. Again, it is pretty chilly in this garage, so heat is a bit of a problem, but we can work on that in the future. We can possibly add heating pads or things like that, just to expand the amount of space that we have. Another thing that I've been doing this week is in my garden, I had the body of an old bottle fridge. I've spoken about this many times because I've used it in my garden as a cold frame, but I did find when the sun shined through the glass windows, it just got too hot in that. The steam was pouring out of it, and it just got too hot, killed and fried a lot of my plants that I had in there. But because I have a new job that I start next week, it's got me rethinking about going back to using this bottle fridge. And I've been looking at it. I've moved it into my garage where it's not going to be in sunlight. And I think with a grow light in there, which I've ordered, it will do the job. Now, this bottle fridge is a type of fridge you would find behind the bar in a pub. It has good lights. It's silver material on the inside, so it reflects light all the way round. If I wanted to, I could use the fan on it as well. Being that it is a fridge and I'm a refrigeration engineer, I can do things to modify it safely. Obviously, not everybody is in that position, but for me, I'm just looking at it, it's insulated, so it's going to hold on to a lot of temperature as well. I was actually hoping to have this set up by now, but my grow light just haven't arrived in time. Now, when I was looking around for grow lights, there was a lot of debate about what is good grow lights, and this comes down to one of the things that I think is most important: the cost of them. Some of these grow lights were down around the £10 mark, and some can be several £100s. Obviously there's a lot of factors that are involved, and of course the statement is always true: buy the best that you can afford. Well, I could only really afford the cheapest I could find that is the right size. Now, my old IKEA ones were between £10 to £20. I've bought one that was £17, and when it arrives, I'll be screwing it inside this walk-in fridge. The IKEA ones, though, I've been really happy. It's just a shame they don't sell them anymore. Now, I have had lots of conversations with fellow gardeners about cheap grow lights and expensive grow lights, and there's people that sing the praises for no matter what end of the scale. So we're going to experiment and just see how well that these grow lights perform. For me, the important thing is making sure that the grow lights themselves have the full spectrum light. This provides a full range of light, which is what the sunlight gives us. It's what we're kind of replicating, isn't it? Sunlight. There are some on the market that are known as blurple. These are the bluey purple lights, and they're often seen, I've seen them many times. They're actually very good for vegetative growth, so they're actually good for growing healthy foliage. Unfortunately, I don't really like this blurple look. One, because of the association it has with drug farmers, but two, I just don't like how the blurple looks. I much prefer the full spectrum lights. Added to that, there are also lights on the other end of the scale, the redder end of the scale, but these are there to encourage fruiting, and that's not really what we want. The redder light grow lights would probably be if you were growing flowers indoors and you just needed that red light to encourage flowering. For me, I've stuck with that full spectrum light because I think that gives us better options and it sits quite what I want. Now, the other factor, of course, is light intensity. The brighter the light, the better in many cases, but some of these grow lights on the market can be dimmed to make them lighter or darker. The other option, of course, is just to move the plants, which is what I'm going to be doing, closer or further to and from the light. Now, some actually do have a way of moving the light themselves. They're on like a extendable pole. But for me, keep it simple. I'll just move the plants by putting stuff underneath the tray of plants in order to encourage the growth that way. That's how I'm going to be doing it anyway. But your situation might be different. Now, the closer we get to the light, the stronger the growth is going to be. I've actually got a tomato plant in my hydroponics that the grow light on that rises as the plant grows. I move it up as the plant grows, and it's actually surprising just how strong the growth is on that tomato plant. Now, one of the advantages with this fridge that I'm going to be using is that it is reflective on the inside. So that light is going to be reflected all around the plant. This is a really important part because sometimes if a light is coming from one direction, the plant will sort of stretch itself to try and reach that light. And this is where we get stretched looking plants, otherwise known as leggy plants, which isn't what we want because that can be quite a weak growth. But getting it from all directions, reflecting the light around, again, we could use some reflective material. Space blankets or grow tents are used quite a bit. Grow tents are basically a silver tent, often, again, associated with cannabis farmers, but they are becoming more and more for the domestic market. Space blankets are pretty cheap. They're the type of blankets that you might see somebody who's been in an emergency situation or runners after they've run a marathon. They get wrapped up in space blankets in order to retain some of that heat. Now, I said at the beginning, I discussed whether I actually needed grow lights on a previous podcast, and my situation has changed. My thoughts on that has changed. I now think they are essential for my garden, for my growth. Your situation could be different, but if you've got any thoughts, if you have used grow lights, or if you don't feel you need them, let me know. Let's have a conversation about it. Now, I'm going to head back into the potting shed. In the meantime, let's find out what Chef Scott is cooking up this week.
Chopping all the veggies, sizzle in the air. Chef Scott with the magic, smells are everywhere. Water starts to boil, onions hit the pan. Recipe of the week, let the feast begin. Cooking with Chef Scott, flavors come alive. Tune in every week for a tasty bite.
Hi, it's Scott here with this week's recipe, and this week we have another purple sprouting broccoli recipe, and it is roast purple sprouting with chorizo, cashew nuts and tomato, a versatile side dish that goes great with fish, chicken or pork. So let's not delay and head to the kitchen and hear how it's made. As usual, you can find this recipe and others on the veggrowerpodcast.co.uk and on my Instagram page, Seed to Table Plot 13. For this recipe, you will need 500 grams of purple sprouting broccoli, 150 grams of chopped cashew nuts, 200 grams of diced cooking chorizo, half a red onion diced, 150 grams of halved cherry tomatoes, and 4 cloves of garlic chopped. Method. Combine all the ingredients together in a mixing bowl and toss with a little olive oil, salt and pepper. And then transfer to a roasting tray and roast in a preheated oven set at 190 degrees Celsius for 15 to 20 minutes. And that's the recipe done, and that's it from me this week.
Well, once again, that is another absolutely delicious sounding dish from Scott. I can't wait to try this dish as well. I always try and cook every single dish that Scott sends over, and I always love them. Always so tasty and always such a different way and simple to cook. So this one particularly, I think, sounds absolutely amazing. Now, moving on from that, I have to admit I am incredibly lucky. Every February, I attend an event in London called the Garden Press Event. And this is an event held for members of the Gardening Media Press. And the idea is that Garden Media Press people, they attend and brands showcase their products. The idea being that brands can get their products seen by people like you, the end target. And this is through people like myself, podcasters, YouTubers, magazines, TV, radio, the list goes on, basically anything to do with media. Now, I've got to admit, after several years of going to this event, I kind of know what to expect, and it's still very, very enjoyable. There's not enough hours in the day to get around everybody is the only downside. But what I always try to keep my eye out is for anything that is new, anything that is exciting and innovative that you might be interested in. Last year, I felt we had a lot of new products, a lot of new interesting things that really caught my eye. Now this year, I didn't think there was so much new products out for anybody to see. Lots of rebranding going on, lots of rehashing the same products, I guess you could say, but nothing that I felt was really, really new. It could just be one of those years. Next year could be completely different. But there were a couple of things that have caught my eye. And the first is actually more of a service than a product. It's an app that also works on your desktop or Mac called Fjord, spelled F-R-Y-D. Now, this is a really interesting app. I've actually been playing around with it. I discovered I had already downloaded the app beforehand, but I've been playing around with it, looking into it and seeing what it's all about. And so far, I've got to admit, I'm very, very impressed. Now, what this app does is it gives you the option to design and keep track of your garden, your allotment, so that you know what's grown where, keep a track of it, plan it in advance, work out your successional sowing, your rotational plans, and things like that. Things that I think are very, very exciting, very, very interesting, and certainly useful if, like me, I'm always walking around with my phone. Now, I have played around in the past with apps similar to this. In fact, we've had one guy on who created his own app in the past. What sets this out to be a little bit different is the fact that it includes more of a community, more of a social media presence about it. In that, there's videos on how to, videos from known people in the gardening world, forums and things like that. So I have to admit, I quite like the concept. My trouble comes is that I am not very good at using apps or software to plan my garden, plan my allotment. I'm still very much a paper and pen guy. But that might be for interest to you. You might find that much more appealing. So that's Fjord. I have, of course, added links to everything in the blog post for this episode. Now, another item that caught my eye as being a little bit different is, well, it's nothing new. Again, what this product that I've seen, it's made by a company called Occo. And again, there's links in the show notes. What this basically is a wireless soil monitor that you can use on your potted plants indoors. I believe it can go outdoors as well. But what it does is you stick this probe into the soil and it measures things like your soil, how much moisture is in your soil, your pH, your humidity around your plants and things like that. Things that if you are really getting scientific and you really want to keep an eye on how your plants do, this would be right up your street. For the average gardener, I think it might be a little bit overkill, but unless you've got a really prized plant that you really want to keep going, this may not be for you. But it is an interesting idea. I have to admit, I am a bit of a geek. I do like to see things that I can't see, like monitoring pH and things like that, and seeing how everything follows with that. So the idea behind it is quite good. What makes this a bit unique? One is that it does look like a pebble. It does seem to blend in with your pot plant in a more attractive way. Not completely attractive, if I'm honest with you, but certainly a lot more attractive than anything else I've seen. But it's also accessed through your phone. So you could be lying in bed or you could be away for a couple of days and you can just tap into the app and see what is going on with your plant. So it's got a good vibe about it. I'm just not convinced it's quite what I would use. Again, the idea being is that this is what you would be interested in more than what I'm interested in. Now, it is early in the season, which I've said time and time again, and sometimes that does mean there's not many interesting plants there. But there was one that did catch my eye. A lot of it is obviously for the flowering plants, but this one is right up our street. So what it is there was a company called Frank P. Matthews. You may have heard of them. They're a well-known brand. And they have got this new pear tree for sale, which is called the Cornish Gold. Now, this Cornish Gold is absolutely brilliant for juicing. And trust me, they gave samples away of this juice. It is delicious, and I mean delicious. I actually want this tree just so I can grow my own pear for juicing because it is so good. Really cannot express just how good it was. Now, what's interesting about this tree is the story behind it. So the tree itself was dated back to 1700 and it was planted in a kitchen garden of a farm, but was kind of not really known about until 2015. In 2015, I guess you could say it was rediscovered. This tree is known as the tree burrow pear, by the way. And it was rediscovered because of how good the juice was. And Frank P. Matthews and a load of scientists got involved and they looked into it, and it's got such amazing story behind it. And Frank P. Matthews have basically gone away with this tree, taken cuttings and propagated more trees for sale. And I really cannot wait to get my hands on one. Really delicious. It really is delicious. I cannot speak any more highly of it. Now, there was more products, more items that obviously we will be exploring throughout the year. But one more thing that I did come across that I found quite interesting, and it's a very well-known brand. It's called Jay's Fluid. You've probably heard of them. They've been around for 145 years. Now, in the past, I've used Jay's Fluid, but I have not used it for a number of years. Reason being is that I do not like to use chemicals. I do not like to use bleaches or disinfectants as much as I possibly can. But there are times when you do need a disinfectant, particularly if you've got things like avian flu going around that farmers are struggling with at the moment, or you have, I don't know, a nasty disease that could be on some of your pots that you don't want to spread, or in your greenhouse even. Now, Jay's Fluid was sold to somebody else and they completely changed the recipe. And the feedback they were getting is that the things that people liked about Jay's Fluid was lost. And it was things like the colour of the mixture, the smell that went with the mixture, and things like that. Now, a lot of this is unavailable anymore because of certain regulations about certain chemicals. Some of the chemicals, I suspect, were not very good for us or for the environment. So the company that has now bought Jay's Fluid recently brought it back. They've gone back to the original recipe and they've tried to keep to the original recipe as much as they possibly can. We're talking like 99.9% as close as they possibly can, while sticking within the legal remit. Now, I come back to the fact that I've not really used Jay's Fluid in a number of years, but it did sort of seem to me like a company had lost its way with the feedback I was reading. And I find it quite interesting that they're returning to what is well known. Jay's Fluid, as I said, is a well-known brand, and it has a very distinct smell, and I do remember using it in the past. Will this be for everybody? I don't know. It's certainly not something I have really thought about. I think there are times when we need a disinfectant, but I try not to use it as much as possible. But I'm going to be doing some research into this to see just how organic or how safe it is to use Jay's Fluid in my own garden. Now, that's just 4 items that I've barely even touched upon. There is more that will be coming out in the future, and we will be discussing that with you as and when it happens. So look forward to seeing that. And that brings us up to near the end of this week's podcast. Now, if you've enjoyed this podcast, then please rate and review. Rating and reviewing goes a long way in helping us get found by more people. Now, we have had a couple of reviews come in this week. On Podbean, Nicholas says, just found this podcast and it's quite interesting hearing how others deal with allotments, pests, plot problems, and myself, I have an allotment and a home garden. Just enjoyed my first episode. Thank you so much to Nicola for that. It's lovely to have you, and I hope you continue listening and enjoying the podcast. Over on Spotify, Lynn has also got in touch, and she says, huge congratulations on the new job. I've got a new job. If I haven't mentioned it, it's because I've told my supporter club members first. Do hope it goes well. Don't know if this idea is a good one, but I need some advice. Planted garlic in a bed last autumn, and it is growing well. I want to use a whole bed for asparagus. Could I safely lift each of the garlic in a good-sized root bowl and move it somewhere else? Thanks, Lynn. Now, this is not something I've ever had experience of. It's something that does worry me if I ever get kicked off my allotment, how I would deal with things like garlic growing in the ground. And it's not really something that I would want to try and tackle, in all honesty. I would want to try and leave it there for as much as possible. But of course, not everything goes to plan, and sometimes you do need to move your plants around. Now, I do think if you were to do this, as long as you move a good sized root ball and try and disturb the roots as least as possible, and do it sooner rather than later as well, because while the soil is still moist and starting to warm up, you will probably be okay. But it's not something I would want to do. It's not something I've had any experience, but I'll give it a try. I would give it a try if I really, really had to. Got nothing to lose at the end of the day. The only other thing I would say is that you want to plant asparagus, you say. Do you really need that asparagus to go in that bed this year, or can it wait till, say, the garlic has been harvested? What you could do with your asparagus plants in the meantime is just pot them into bigger and bigger pots as they grow, and then just pop those pots in the ground once the garlic has been harvested. That would probably be the safer way. It means your asparagus will continue to grow. I know we say you've got 3 years once it is established, but it is still establishing inside that pot. As long as the pot is big enough, it will be fine. And I've planted asparagus in late autumn. This is an autumn planted type of asparagus, and by planting in late autumn we were actually harvesting within a couple of years, because that was already year 1 out the way. So if you could wait, that's what I would be inclined to do, but again, totally up to you. Anybody got any experience of moving garlic? Please do share that with us. It would be good to find out more. Well, if you have enjoyed this podcast, you want to help support the work that we do, then please consider becoming a member of our supporters club. Details on that at theveggrowerpodcast.co.uk. Added to that, if you want to get in touch, you can of course leave a comment on the bottom of a blog post at theveggrowerpodcast.co.uk. You can also leave us a voicemail at theveggrowerpodcast.co.uk just by hitting the voicemail button. Very easy to do, and it's always good to get new voices on the podcast. And don't forget, you can email me, Richard at theveggrowerpodcast.co.uk, or you can find me on social media. We will be back again next time, so until then, please take care.